My buddy said that kids would often run up to the convoy trucks in Iraq and some of the guys would give them candy, even though they weren't supposed to. On one such occasion, a kid tossed 2 live grenades into the truck. One of the grenades was quickly tossed away to explode without issue, the other was not as easy to get rid of and ended up amongst the group of kids. The guys giving out candy were put on cleanup duty. No idea what the approximate age of the children was and not many other details. It was pretty rare to get him drunk enough and in a mood to talk about any of it. There was a kid sitting on an overpass in Iraq, dropping Molotov cocktails trying to make it into the gunner's hatch of all the MRAPs in our convoy. A .50 caliber gunner saw him and cut him in half. He was probably 10 years old or so. I'm guessing how old he looked. He could have been older, it's hard to tell. But they would do some messed up stuff. They would manipulate younger kids and get them to do things like attack us so they wouldn't be killed and to make us look bad like we're killing kids because we can. I've heard stories of them using mentally impaired kids as unknowing suicide bombers. They would strap a vest to them and tell them to go up to the American troops, they'll give you candy, and then when they approach us they'll blow them up. My platoon sergeant was on his 3rd tour when he joined our unit heading to the sandbox. I'll probably never forget the time he just dropped in casual conversation, in a joking manner, "You can take home a lot of things from your time in service, but I'd rather not have been the first guy in my neighborhood with 3 confirmed kills." And he just kept talking from there like he didn't want to give anyone else a chance to question what he just said. It worked. I never asked. By the end of our tour nothing really happened the whole time. He got comfortable enough with us to tell some stories from his past tours. One of them involved meeting a 13-year-old Iraqi boy awkwardly trying to carry an RPG in the suburbs of Baghdad, and the sergeant just up and running at the kid, screaming at the top of his lungs, firing his weapon as fast as he could in the air, scaring the kid enough for him to drop the RPG and run. I never saw his file to see if he had a bronze or silver star, but I think he earned something that day. Kid was likely just being used as a mule to bring gear and ammo to insurgents, so he wasn't likely a threat himself, but he could have been shot for carrying a weapon by someone too quick on the trigger. Sergeant intervened, but chasing someone through the streets is likely to get you isolated and shot, so he had no idea what happened to the kid. My old roommate never really talked about his time in Iraq, but we were hanging out getting unreasonably drunk one night and he told me about killing a kid. He was so upset about it. But what are you supposed to do when they're shooting at you? My heart breaks for him. He's had a rough life in a lot of ways. The last time I saw him was when I invited him out to grab a couple drinks for his birthday. He said yeah, he might have some other plans to get to, but he wanted to hang out anyway. We sat around drinking and smoking and his phone didn't go off once. We stayed until the bar closed. He's very much a loner and really tends to push people away, but I try to reach out occasionally so he knows someone cares. My ex was British Royal Marines, and fought child soldiers. This was 10+ years before I met him, but he had horrible nightmares and on a couple of occasions broke down crying, while drunk. He never told me everything in a coherent, start-to-finish way, but from what I've pieced together he killed 1, or more, child soldiers, protecting his unit. It catapulted him into self-loathing. He got awarded a medal for it, refused to accept it, but was forced to attend the ceremony with members of the royal family. Only got through it by drinking himself into a stupor and then spent the next 4 to 5 years with a serious coke habit before being able to transition into more moderate alcoholism. So yay. My best friend in the world, known him since kindergarten. He always dreamed of serving, being Captain America, you know? Went to the US Air Force Academy after high school. Got a history degree and dreamed of a 20-year career in the military and teaching high school history after that. After a couple of years in the Air Force as an officer he transitioned into the Army. Went through SF training and passed. Served all over the Middle East, Africa, South America, etc. Never told any stories. He transitioned out a few years ago as an Army Special Forces captain. Within a year he took his own life while his wife and almost newborn baby were downstairs in his house. I will never know the situations he faced, but obviously it's enough that the strongest man I've known couldn't. I can't speak for others, and thankfully I never had to pull the trigger, but I always gave them a lot more time in the crosshairs, versus an adult. There were several times they ran up unexpectedly, waved a gun in our direction, or just generally acted like they were going to attack us. I'd put them in my sights and beg God, please don't make me do this. Thankfully, every time, they'd stop what they were doing. If it were an adult aiming a weapon at us, they'd get zero thought. I remember the ones I didn't pull the trigger on so much more than the ones that I did. I'm sure a lot of soldiers would disagree with me, but I sleep just fine at night. I remember manning a guard post when some kid, about 16, jumped out of his truck holding a huge knife and started walking towards me. I was like, what the hell is this kid doing? He's got a knife and I'm wearing body armor and carrying an M4. He kept moving on us and no one I was with seemed to know what to do, so I chambered around and aimed at the kid. He froze. I gestured towards his knife with the barrel of my weapon and the look of realization came to his face as he looked at the blade in his hand. It was like he didn't even realize he was carrying it. By this time everyone else was aiming at him. I thought he was going to shit himself. Right after I did, he turned around and ran back to his truck and took off. To this day I have no idea what was going on. Maybe he was told to make his bones and that was the best he could come up with? Or maybe he wanted to talk to us legit and didn't realize he was holding a knife? I don't know. All I know is I almost killed him. And if he was old enough to have some facial hair he would have been dead before he got 2 steps. Hell, I wonder what the hell he was thinking or what the hell his deal was. Not me, but a fraternity brother and close friend who passed away told me a story once about his second deployment in the Middle East. He was an Army Ranger, Army Special Ops, and was a breacher enduring all breaches because he had balls of steel and insane reflexes. He told me that he killed a kid once who couldn't have been more than 14 years old. He said the action wasn't what haunted him, he said it was how it happened. He was leading the team through an alleyway to a door that led to a suspected illegal weapons cache, and he held his breaching shotgun up to the door and gave count, and as soon as he was about to breach, the door swung open and a kid leaned out through the door with an AK-47 pointed outward. So he blasted the kid in the face with the breacher shotgun and he said the look of surprise on the kid's face was what bothered him, a mix of surprise and inevitability of his doom. There's no running from a shotgun blast to the face. I was with the SADF back in Angola, my platoon and I had few brushes with the MPLA, we mostly met poorly trained militias armed with old Soviet gear. But I remember on one occasion, we were entering a village where we were supposed to get water. The village, if we can even call it that, had around 10 to 15 actual houses and of those at least half were abandoned. I remember that our spotter yelled out to us, telling us to get prepared. Our lieutenant saw something that visibly shocked him and called out our sergeant. We received the order to issue warning shots south of our position. That's when we all saw it, around 30 to 40 kids with guns bigger than them with a few adults who seemed to be their COS. Our sergeant ordered us to target the officers, and we did. Even after all 6 of their adults were killed in actions, the kids still continued to shoot, with no control of their fire. After maybe 5 minutes the order came, fire at will. I don't remember if the entire platoon opened fire, I remember I did. In the moment, I didn't quite think about who I was shooting, I don't think anyone did. All we saw was an enemy eager to send us home in body bags. We saw enemy uniforms, nothing else. Nobody said anything afterwards. My comrades probably all willingly forgot this or justified it by saying something like us or them. It's very easy to analyze the situation if you weren't there. But when you're in the moment, you forget that the ones on the other side are just like you. So to sum it all up, I opened fire without thinking too hard about it. Don't know if I regret it, I just know I don't like remembering. I knew a guy who served and we got drunk one night and I was the idiot who asked, "What's the worst thing you saw while serving over there?" He got quiet and got this far away look in his eyes and then he told me this story. I was in an armored convoy and we were in the middle of a patrol, but it had been a pretty normal day. The school buses that were used were pretty much just minivans, so the only way to identify it was a school bus was usually the sticker they placed on the side. Anyways, the area we were in was known for placing copper on top of their bombs because when a bomb ignites the copper liquefies and basically goes through anything. Even our tanks can't block this. So we're on patrol and a bomb goes off about 10 feet to our right and I figured I was a dead man. Right then a school bus drove by and provided cover from the blast, so only one of our soldiers was hurt but not seriously. However, that school bus was blown to hell. Most of the kids died, but the worst part was the driver of the school bus survived, who was a middle-aged woman. But her legs and arms had been blown away from the blast, so we had to drive her to the nearest hospital. I'll never forget her screams, especially because she had to sit under my legs since we had no room. She screamed and screamed. But mostly I won't forget the arms and legs of the children that had been destroyed from that blast. It will haunt me forever. Didn't actually pull the trigger on the kid but was ready to. Convoy through a village and the kid reaches into a pocket and pulls out what looks like a grenade and tries to throw it. I hesitated. The grenade slipped out of his hand behind him. It was a rock. I was ready to kill a kid over a rock. If it was a grenade and he managed to throw it, my hesitation could have meant my buddies' lives. I'm glad it was a rock. If you've never been in combat, it's hard to explain to people how frenetic and chaotic combat can be. You don't get a red pip that highlights where the enemy is. You don't have a radar. You don't get a notification that your shot hit its target. You hear bullet sounds past you, smack into something near you, ground, wall, trees, vehicles, etc., and you get behind cover. You then start yelling to your squad mates about where you collectively think the incoming fire is coming from. Sometimes it's obvious, but usually it's not. You're even more in trouble if you're in an urban setting where there are non-combatant civilians running around, worse still when you simply can't tell the difference between the two. You're trying to not die. You're trying to leave cover, acquire a target, shoot that target, and then get back behind the cover before someone sees you and shoots you. This does not leave a whole lot of time for pondering how old your target is, what their motivations are, or how long they've been a soldier. Mix this in with the kids who would run around trying to pick up brass in the middle of a firefight, and it's just a hot, chaotic mess. I didn't want to die, so I shot back. Most people who have been in combat will tell you something similar. During Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2004, I was on a 4-week operation in northern Iraq on the Syrian border with 1st Stryker Division. 4 strikers, 4 men each, spaced every 5 miles. Boring as all get out, as we were literally just watching the same paths, day in and out for 4 mind-numbing weeks. Within the first few days, an old woman from the local village would show up with a few kids and some pita-type bread. They'd give us stacks of the bread to eat and we'd give them candy and water. This carried on every day into the 2nd week until one day. It was all different. Instead of the old woman and kids, this day, it was a lone, little girl. Maybe 8 years old. Immediately the 5 of us on my truck knew this was not okay. You see, we'd usually see them coming up over a rise in the direction of the nearest village, a mile and a half away. Our trucks had what is called an LRAS on them, long-range advanced scout surveillance system. John could read numbers off a credit card from a great distance. And when they did, they were usually running and excited. Happy and smiling. This day, the single little girl slowly walked over the rise towards us, sobbing uncontrollably and carrying a huge stack of the pita-type bread. We called it into our platoon sergeant and applied our learned rules of engagement. Initially we screamed at her on the bullhorn. Ta'akfa satlak al-nar. Stop or I'll shoot in Arabic. All I ever bothered to learn. Oh, and Sahara? Cigarette? Anyways, still she pressed on. Once we saw she wasn't going to stop and walked within 400 meters of us, we began to take warning shots into the air. Still she walked towards us. We began to shoot into the dirt 30 meters to her right or left. She pisses herself and pukes. Still holding the bread. Still walking towards us. Now she's 200 meters from us. The whole time we are relaying the situation to our platoon sergeant. He's screaming over the mic to all 5 of us, "I'm gonna be there in 5 mics. If the threat isn't neutralized by the time I get there, I'll do it myself." Me and one soldier had kids, so we agreed we definitely weren't shooting a kid and the other 3 agreed. Everyone just froze up. Between the platoon sergeant screaming over the mic, seeing the girl so obviously distraught, literally pissing all over herself and throwing up, knowing she's probably gonna blow up and one or more of us is gonna be injured or worse. Seeing her still trudge forward amidst the screams over the bullhorn and the warning shots ringing out. Madness. We all just froze, not wanting to kill a kid. And just like that, when 100 meters or so away from us, we heard a shot and then saw the hit against her chest and she fell flat backwards, pita bread on her chest. Our platoon sergeant had came up behind us on his truck, and just as he said, if the threat wasn't neutralized by the time he got there, he would do it himself. So he did. We waited for 4 hours for explosives ordnance disposal to come and confirm. The stack of pita bread was hollowed out and 3 fragmentation grenades were inside, thin wire looped through the pins and around the child's waist, meant to be passed off, pulling the pins and blowing us up. 2 weeks later, when we finished the op and were fortunate enough to get 48 hours downtime, me and my 4 squad mates on the striker that refused to shoot a little girl, were mercilessly smoked by the platoon sergeant for 24 of those 48 hours. He ran us into the ground with a fury I've since never experienced. You could all be dead. And that little B exclamation mark dollar at hash would have been the one to kill you. She was a little over 4.5 feet tall. She wore a pair of old, faded, neon teal sweatpants and a red Minnie Mouse sweatshirt. Her hair was dark black and she wore it down, wind kicking it everywhere. I can see her face so vividly now as I write this. I can hear my buddies screaming and arguing about what to do. I can smell our grit and grime from being unbathed for 2 weeks. I can still faintly hear her sobs. That was 15 years ago and I will never forget the ugly nature of man I saw that day. On both sides. On theirs for forcing a child to do such a thing. And our side for having to kill a kid for